201 miles in 9 hours, 39 minutes. Not my fastest time at LOTOJA, but still a hard fought day on the bike. It's also a good race duration to test the ride quality of the SL8. 70 miles solo in the wind was a great chance to test the aerodynamics. And the rough roads between Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming were a great chance to test the Victoria CORSA Pros. In this video, we'll run through the equipment I decided to use, changes I'd make if I could do it over again, and I'll give you a brief rundown of the race. And if you want to see part 1 of the series, I'll post it up above here or down below in the description. I went into a few more details in that video. For this race, I used the new Tarmac SL8, and look, it was just as comfortable as my SL7 that I've ridden for the last 3 years of this race. I felt no additional body fatigue from the increased stiffness, and I'd have no hesitation riding it for LOTOJA or any race of this duration again. I opted for the 4.5s over the 2.3s, and I think that was the right call, especially when you consider how much time I spent alone in the wind. There was a point on the 3rd climb where it got steep, and I wish that I had the snappiness of the 2.3s, but look, it would have made a marginal difference over the course of the day, and I think the greater gain was from the deeper wheels on the long descents and on the flats. Contrary to what most said, I decided to go with the Victoria CORSA Pros in 28mm. I continue to have nothing but positive experiences on these tires. This decision came down to familiarity and puncture protection. The CORSA Pros have been flawless for me. They were flawless in France and they've been flawless all summer. The only thing I might change is I might go back and run 30mm tires and not 28s. If I continue to ride SRAM into next year, I'd switch to a 50-37. See, the 48 tooth spins out at around 42 miles an hour, and I often find myself spinning at 120 RPM. Definitely not my preferred cadence. There are really no technical descents, so you can push a pace that's pretty fast, and I think a 50 tooth, or maybe even larger, would be ideal. Last year I was riding a 53-11, and I think it was much better suited for this race. For this race, I decided to go with my old WAHOO Element bolt, knowing that I was rarely going to look at the computer during the race, and that proved to be the case. And look, it worked just fine. And for all of the folks who have messaged me about the battery life on the Karoo 2, I had friends use it, and they finished with over 30% battery life remaining. For the last 3 years of this race, I've had my old Tarmac SL7, the original one with the CLX 64s and a handful of ceramic speed upgrades. And so comparing that to my current SL8 setup, I felt like this setup was just as fast, if not faster and more efficient. So how did the race play out? Well, first, let me say that there was a bad crash close to the finish, and our thoughts and prayers are with Josh and his family as he recovers from the accident. Dude, we're rallying for you. An attack was made on the first climb at mile 52 that split the group. In my starting group of 55, I found myself off the lead group. I was with 2 teammates, and we had 2 teammates who made it into the lead group. At the first feed zone or rider support zone, there was some confusion about our strategy to get back to the main group. I made a tough decision at that point to grab 2 new bottles and just head off quickly on a solo mission in hopes of catching my teammates ahead. I went up the 2nd climb, Geneva, and the 3rd climb, Salt River solo, finally catching a group just outside of the feed zone in Afton. I was basically alone from mile 75 to 118. I found a good group to work with out of Afton into Alpine, and then at mile 165 or so, I saw a big group of 10 or more riders, 3 of which were in my start group. Quickly doing the math, I had the thought, if I can beat these guys, I might have a shot at a top 10 finish. I passed the group of 10 fast enough that they wouldn't be able to grab my wheel, and I went solo along the Snake River into Jackson, Wyoming. And at this point, it's getting into the afternoon, it's getting windy, and I'm really starting to feel the effects of being solo for so long. At around mile 188, I peek over my shoulder and I can see them off in the distance. A mile later, I look back, they're a little bit closer. A mile later, they're closer again. I realize that eventually they're gonna catch me, and they do at around mile 193. And at this point, I'm actually glad to see them and get a break from the wind. We chat a little bit over the next 8 miles, and then everything gets quiet as we get closer to the finish. Since we're so late in the race, this is a mixed group that I go into the finish with. There are 3 400 guys plus myself. And I'm only concerned about the guys with 400 numbers because those are the guys who I started with, and those are the guys who I'm ultimately racing against. I make sure those guys are in front of me, I make sure I know where they're at, and as we go into the final finishing shoot, one guy goes, I hop on his wheel, we sprint for the finish for what I would later learn would be 9th place. All in all, it was an awesome day. I told my wife the night before that if I wanted a chance at a podium spot against these Northern California guys who we had raced against in 2020, I needed to have like my best of best days, and they needed to just have an okay day. And I knew that going into it. I mean, look, those guys who made that attack at mile 52, They ultimately ended up finishing in a 2-man break, so they held everybody off for 150 miles. This was one of those years for me where effort trumped outcome, and I'm totally cool with that. I did everything that I could to catch my teammates up ahead. I'm stoked on how our team rode, and congrats to David, Glenn, Derek, and Taylor. You guys freaking brought it. Great race. Also to Creighton, fantastic job. Also, huge congrats to the boys who went 8:42 on the day. That is an insane time. Next week, we'll start talking about wheel depth and why I was so on the fence between ENVE 2.3s and 4.5s. We're gonna talk about Sportful. I've been trying to handful their products and I really like their kits. And I've been riding the Crux more and more, and I wanna talk about whether or not I still think it's a good buy in 2023. Anyways, until next time.